My name is Emily, age 44, and I'm employed as a TV broadcaster. Alongside me is my husband Tom, also 44, who manages a photography studio. Our journey began in high school, where we became each other's first and only significant other. The path to marriage was natural, as if destiny had woven our lives together seamlessly. At 25, tragedy struck when I lost my parents in an accident. In the aftermath, Tom's unwavering support was a lifeline, solidifying his place as not just a husband but a familial anchor. Post-nuptials, Tom relocated to my childhood home, a sanctuary left behind by my parents, where I found solace in our shared space. Our union bore fruit with the arrival of our son, bringing immense joy into our lives. Tom proved to be the epitome of an egalitarian partner, seamlessly balancing household responsibilities and childcare, a testament to his commitment to our shared goals. Yet, amidst our bliss, a shadow loomed in the form of my mother-in-law, Jen. She couldn't reconcile with the sight of Tom, a man, taking charge of domestic duties. Reflecting on an incident a decade past, when our son was just beginning elementary school, Jen's presence escalated. With the transition from nursery to elementary school came logistical challenges, prompting us to rely on her assistance in ferrying our son home. Her frequent visits coincided with her husband Steve's retirement, affording them both ample free time. Jen, a staunch traditionalist, had embraced the role of homemaker, while Steve was less inclined towards household chores. Whenever Tom found himself in the kitchen, effortlessly whipping up meals, Jen's disapproval lingered audibly in muttered phrases like, "A man's place isn't in the kitchen," or nostalgic remarks about how their generation wouldn't conceive of such occurrences. Upon my initial visit to their home, Jen wasted no time in expressing her expectation for me to relinquish my career aspirations, firmly rooted in her belief that women should prioritize homemaking. My role as a glamorous broadcaster seemed to irk her, contrasting sharply with her worldview. Yet Tom, who had witnessed my passion for broadcasting since our high school days, remained steadfast in his support for my ambitions. Likewise, I championed his pursuit of photography, and our symbiotic collaboration felt organic and effortless. Navigating the challenges of nursery school proved to be a joint effort, but the transition to elementary school brought unexpected hurdles, particularly with after-school care proving less accommodating. This compelled us to lean on Jen's assistance more heavily. As she began to frequent our home, her critiques of household tasks became a common refrain. Despite Tom's nonchalant responses defending our division of labor, Jen persisted in voicing her disapproval, often behind my back. Yet, recognizing her invaluable help, I chose to endure her comments in silence, opting not to engage in confrontation. Despite her traditional values, Jen had a surprising affinity for modern conveniences. Proudly brandishing her smartphone, she boasted of being the sole owner among her peers, reveling in the ease of access it provided. "I'm ahead of the curve," she proclaimed, enthusiastically exploring the internet for various purposes. "Look at how simple it is to do things now," she remarked, advocating for the adoption of convenient tools. Embracing the digital age, she efficiently utilized online platforms for tasks like restaurant reservations and service bookings. However, Jen's embrace of modernity seemed selective when it came to our family's shopping habits. Disapproving of our reliance on a delivery service for weekly grocery orders, she voiced her dissent with comments like, "You should handle the shopping yourself," and lamented the perceived wastefulness of delivery fees. Yet, her tune changed upon discovering the option to order groceries online. Encouraging me to embrace this newfound convenience, she eagerly advocated for the abandonment of outdated paper forms, highlighting the benefits of digital shopping. During evenings when Jen lingered at our home while Tom and I prepared dinner, she often cited the need to return for Steve's meal, emphasizing his inability to dine alone. Steve's aversion to household tasks was evident, leaving Jen to shoulder the domestic burden. Curious about Tom's contrasting approach, I once questioned him about his cooperative attitude towards chores, given his upbringing. Tom's response shed light on his determination to avoid the same complaints his mother had voiced about his father's lack of involvement. It was a lesson learned through observation of negative patterns. Jen's frustration with her husband's reluctance to contribute to household chores was palpable, contrasting with her bemusement at her son's willingness to pitch in. Perplexed by her seemingly contradictory stance, I suspected that Jen found solace in airing grievances, prompting me to maintain a cautious distance. Little did I know at the time, Jen's mounting frustrations would eventually lead her to take drastic actions, such as selling our house without consent, revealing the depths of her desperation. That summer brought an exciting opportunity when my company extended an invitation for a 2-month business trip abroad to cover a sports broadcast at the World Championship. It was a rare chance that felt like the culmination of my hard work and dedication. Recognizing the significance of this opportunity, I turned to Tom for guidance. Amidst his own commitments, he expressed uncertainty about managing both work and caring for our son John. It was then that Jen, who had been quietly listening, stepped in with an offer to assist. Despite lingering reservations from past encounters, the absence of alternative options left me with little choice but to entrust John's care to Jen. While considering the option of having Tom and John stay with Tom's parents, we realized the logistical challenges of commuting to school from their location. Ultimately, we settled on the arrangement of Jen staying at our home during weekdays to provide care for John. With this plan in motion, I embarked on my business trip, fully immersing myself in the sportscasting work and achieving significant strides in my career. Exhausted and relieved to be back in the US, I trudged towards my home on a weekday afternoon, burdened by the weight of my suitcase. As I approached the entrance, I was met by Jen, who seemed oddly eager. Prepared to express my gratitude for her assistance during my absence, I was blindsided by her unexpected declaration. "This house sold for $300,000, so I'm taking the full amount." Stunned, I struggled to process her words. "Our house?" I questioned incredulously, hoping for some clarification. With a gleam in her eyes, Jen affirmed, "Yes, this house. Well, actually, we don't technically own it." Her sudden backtrack only added to my confusion, prompting me to question the authenticity of her claim. However, Jen dismissed my doubts with laughter, insisting on the validity of her statement and brandishing the registration certificate as evidence. As she stood there, arms crossed and seemingly victorious, I realized that reasoning with her would be futile. Deciding to change tactics, I attempted to redirect the conversation. "Let's set that aside for a moment. Why are you selling it?" I inquired, hoping for some semblance of explanation. With a nonchalant air, Jen declared, "What belongs to the wife belongs to the husband, and therefore to me. I'm using it to build a new house." Her rationale, though flawed, hinted at a deeper agenda, leaving me grappling with a sense of disbelief and betrayal. As Jen's words echoed in the air, her bloodshot eyes filled me with a creeping sense of unease. The notion of a new house, one that belonged to both my husband and me, suddenly seemed tainted with a sinister undertone. Her resolve was palpable as she outlined her intentions, driven by a misguided sense of obligation to shield Tom from household chores. "I've raised him not to engage in such tasks, and I won't allow him to do so in the future," she declared with unwavering conviction. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, it became clear that Jen's perception of Tom's role in our household had been distorted from the beginning. A simple act of solidarity, when Tom had insisted on sharing household responsibilities shortly after our marriage, had been misconstrued by Jen. In her eyes, Tom's willingness to contribute was a mere reflection of his residence in my house, rather than a genuine commitment to shared responsibilities. The concept of a working couple collaborating on household duties simply did not register in her worldview. Delving deeper into the situation, I discovered the underlying financial strain plaguing Jen and Steve following Steve's retirement. With his pension falling short, expectations and job opportunities scarce, they found themselves grappling with the daunting prospect of maintaining their rented apartment. It was this sense of desperation that drove them to resort to such unthinkable measures. "No, this house isn't mine, and Tom thinks it's normal to do housework," I asserted, attempting to counter Jen's accusations. Yet, before I could elaborate further, Jen dismissed my words as lies, adamantly refusing to entertain any alternative interpretation. Desperate for clarity amidst the chaos, I redirected the conversation towards practical details. "Where did you sell it?" I inquired, hoping to gain insight into the situation. Jen confirmed my suspicions, revealing that she had engaged an online evaluation real estate agent, AA Real Estate, to facilitate the sale. With minimal effort, the necessary documents were submitted, and the transaction proceeded seamlessly. "It's a convenient world, isn't it?" she remarked with a hint of satisfaction. As the details emerged, it became apparent that Jen had acted impulsively, swayed by the assurances of the real estate agent. The allure of a lucrative offer, coupled with the buyer's eagerness for a property in our area, had seemingly convinced her of the transaction's merits, selling a 20-year-old house for $300,000. "I found a good real estate, didn't I?" she boasted proudly, oblivious to the turmoil her actions had caused. As I delved into my investigation, I came across a website for the real estate company that appeared legitimate. Attempting to confirm the validity of the sale, I dialed their number, only to be met with silence on the other end. Seeking clarification from Jen regarding her involvement, I demanded to know if she had physically visited the real estate company's address. Her response was dismissive, claiming that such visits were unnecessary in today's digital age. Determined to uncover the truth, I issued a firm ultimatum: visit the address in person the following day, or our discussion would cease. To my astonishment, Jen's tearful call the next day confirmed my worst fears. The purported real estate company was nowhere to be found. In its place stood a derelict wooden structure devoid of life. Despite the gravity of the situation, I couldn't help but burst into laughter at Jen's folly. Upon her return, Jen confessed to her misguided actions. Fueled by a misplaced sense of opportunity upon discovering the house registration certificate in my name during my absence, she had enlisted the services of the real estate agent. Their shameless assurances, coupled with Jen's naivety, led her to believe that the sale was legitimate, even without actual ownership. In her eagerness to seize what she perceived as an opportunity, she had unwittingly fallen prey to deception, providing the agent with all the requested documents without hesitation. Upon discovering a potential buyer, the fraudulent real estate agents demanded a deposit, half of their commission fee, amounting to $4,800, equivalent to half of the $9,600 commission promised for the $300,000 sale. Concerned of the gravity of the situation, I promptly contacted the authorities to report the scam. 2 officers were dispatched to our home to investigate the matter further. To our dismay, the police officers revealed that such internet fraud, masquerading as legitimate real estate agents, had become increasingly prevalent. Their modus operandi involved offering free property valuations, soliciting official documents from unsuspecting victims, introducing a fictitious buyer, and then absconding with a hefty fee. It was a cunning scheme that preyed on the vulnerabilities of individuals seeking to sell their properties. With the proliferation of vacant houses and the ease of fabricating addresses for document delivery, such fraudulent activities had surged in recent times. The officers theorized that the fraudsters likely designated a postbox under a fictitious name to receive the documents. Trembling with apprehension, Jen cooperated with the police, providing them with vital information. However, their inquiry took a startling turn when the officer questioned Jen about the house deed. In a barely audible voice, she admitted, "No, it was the original." The revelation left the officer visibly astounded, underscoring the severity of the situation and the extent of Jen's unwitting participation in the scam. As the police officer turned to me for clarification, I calmly denied any involvement in requesting the deposit. "No, I didn't ask for that," I stated plainly. Despite Jen's visibly distressed state, the officer seemed to lean towards trusting my account over hers. "She says she didn't ask for it. Selling things on your own isn't advisable, madame." "This situation is outrageous," he admonished, casting a disapproving glance at Jen, who remained silent, her lip bitten in remorse. Turning his attention back to Jen, the officer probed further about the deed registration. "You sent a copy, right?" Her barely audible response, "No, it was the original," left the officer even more incredulous. His dismay evident, he exchanged a glance with me, silently acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Sensing the need for resolution, the officer inquired about filing a theft report. However, I declined, explaining that the document had no validity in the sale process. "Actually, this house has already been sold to someone else," I revealed, elaborating on the legal changes that rendered the deed registration obsolete in such transactions. While I cherished the deed as a memento of my parents' legacy, its practical significance had diminished over time. With this revelation, the reality of the situation began to sink in, leaving Jen with a heavy sense of regret. As the reality of the situation began to dawn on Jen, she realized her misunderstanding regarding the deed and its implications. In her mind, the presence of the deed signified ongoing ownership of the house. Unaware that its significance had diminished in the sale process orchestrated by the fraudsters, faced with embarrassment and frustration, she turned her gaze towards me with a hint of resentment, questioning why I hadn't sold the house myself. Her muttered words stung, insinuating that my career choices had led to our current predicament. Meeting her gaze with a calm resolve, I explained the true reason behind the sale: Tom's ambition to pursue his dream photography business. With insufficient funds to kickstart his venture, we had made the difficult decision to part with our cherished family home, selling it to an acquaintance and subsequently renting it back. As I recounted the series of events, Jen's demeanor shifted, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Her tearful outburst laid bare the deeper frustrations plaguing her own life, revealing the stark contrast between her own marital struggles and our united front. As she lamented her husband's perceived shortcomings, her grievances poured forth unabated, leaving the police officer at a loss for words as he struggled to navigate the emotional turmoil unfolding before him. Despite filing a fraud report, the perpetrators remained elusive, evading capture for over a decade, leaving little hope for the recovery of the lost funds. In the wake of the ordeal, Steve's trust in Jen waned, prompting him to assume full control over their finances. Stripped of any financial autonomy, Jen found herself relegated to seeking Steve's approval for even the most basic expenses, a restriction she found suffocating and frustrating. As she grappled with the consequences of her actions, Jen turned to Tom for solace, only to be met with a reminder of her own culpability. Bereft of disposable income, she sought employment through senior job listings, eventually finding fulfillment in teaching the elderly how to navigate modern technology. Despite her own struggles, Jen's empathetic approach endeared her to her students, earning her respect for her ability to relate to their challenges and patiently guide them through the intricacies of smartphone usage. Though her circumstances had shifted dramatically, Jen found solace in her newfound role, finding purpose in helping others navigate the digital age. Steve, driven perhaps by his pride, found senior roles unfulfilling and promptly resigned, leaving him without a source of income. Meanwhile, Jen's schedule has become increasingly hectic, often leaving him to tend to household chores as she attends to her commitments. Surprisingly, Steve has discovered a newfound passion for cooking and is honing his skills in the kitchen. The dynamics in Tom's parents' household have shifted dramatically, yet both individuals seem to have found a sense of satisfaction in their new roles. In my own journey, following a successful overseas business trip, I've ascended the career ladder and now serve as the anchor for the evening news. Tom's photography studio is thriving, and together, we've accumulated enough savings to contemplate repurchasing and renovating the family home. We remain grateful to our acquaintance who allowed us to retain ownership of the house despite the distressing ordeal we endured. Ultimately, the situation proved beneficial for Tom's parents. As our son nears adulthood at 17, I've imparted this tale to him as a lesson on the dangers of internet fraud. However, out of respect for his grandparents, I've chosen to keep the aspect of their attempt to sell our house a secret, preserving their dignity.
Why are you getting so worked up about marrying someone who dropped out of college? My sister Michelle, who loves to call herself an elite, said in a triumphant voice. Since I introduced my fiancé, she's been saying whatever she pleases. But I've had enough. She'll regret knowing the truth. I'm Roseanne. I'm 29 years old and about to marry my fiancé. My life is about to change significantly after marriage. I quit my job at a trading company and am now focusing on wedding preparations. My fiancé Hadley is a very calm person. He gets along well with my parents too. It helps that Hadley and I met through my dad's work. My dad is the president of a small but beloved local company. Our business thrives because of the support of local people. I really respect my dad for that. When I see Dad's happy face saying, "I can't believe Hadley is marrying my daughter," my joy about the wedding doubles. It's supposed to be the springtime of my life, but... Hello. Sis, are you here? My parents are at work during the day on weekdays. I was home alone, and the loud footsteps echoed in the empty house. Roseanne, I'm home. Oh, there you are. Long time no see. The quiet afternoon was suddenly interrupted by my sister Michelle's arrival. Michelle, who is 2 years younger than me, lives alone away from home. This house looks old. Dad is the president, so he should spend some money on renovations. Michelle threw her bags on the sofa and looked around the living room with disdain. Dad and Mom are practical people. Besides, this house isn't even 20 years old. Oh, yes, sis, you're frugal too. Michelle scowled, as usual. Michelle has always loved flashy things and glamorous events. When she was little, she would often demand to go on overseas trips or buy brand name clothes, causing trouble for our parents. Our family wasn't struggling with money, but we were practical. That's why our parents initially opposed Michelle attending an expensive private school with a cute uniform just because she liked it. But as soon as they said no, Michelle threw a huge tantrum, crying and causing a ruckus. In the end, our parents couldn't risk her wrecking the house, so they let her attend the private school. You should have listened to my wishes from the beginning. When I heard her change her attitude as soon as our parents gave their consent, I was genuinely shocked. Who on earth did she inherit that from? Seeing Michelle still flaunting her flashy style, I couldn't help but think that. What are you talking about? Oh, nothing, just talking to myself. Oh my gosh, you sound like an old lady. Michelle exaggeratedly pinched her nose and made herself comfortable. Michelle, did you come for something specific today? Oh, right. Sis, you're getting married, right? What's your fiancé like? Michelle leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with mischief. What do you mean by what's he like? He's just a normal person. What university did he graduate from? Michelle shot the question without missing a beat. There it is! And I almost burst out laughing. After attending an elite private school, Michelle went on to a prestigious university. She is incredibly proud of her academic background. Whenever she meets someone, "Which university did you graduate from?" she has to ask. It's almost like her hobby to ask and then feel superior. So, which university did your fiancé graduate from, sis? Frustrated by my lack of response, Michelle pressed the question further. My fiancé didn't go to college. At my answer, Michelle gasped dramatically. Are you saying he only finished high school? No, that's not it. What do you mean? Don't tell me. My fiancé. Hadley's highest education level is high school. But he is. No way! I can't believe it! Without listening to my full explanation, Michelle screamed. Why would you lie about something like this? So, he is a high school dropout, but I have never seen a dropout before. Unbelievable! Actually, I'd love to meet one. Ignoring my explanation, Michelle continued her ranting, making me slightly irritated, but I quickly gave up on the conversation as usual. Okay. My fiancé's education has nothing to do with you, Michelle. Yes, it does. My boyfriend and I are elites, intellectual leaders. Boasting, Michelle mentioned her proud boyfriend she met in college and used unnecessarily complicated words to show off. Intellectual leaders? Do you even know what that means? That's what people like me and my boyfriend are called. So, what kind of people are they? Trying to silence the ever-noisy Michelle, I asked deeply, and as expected, she was at a loss for words. Details don't matter. We're just very great and very smart people. Michelle's ridiculously vague explanation made me chuckle. Geez. Sis, you're always so nitpicky. What I'm trying to say is that we come from prestigious private schools, and having a dropout in the family is absolutely unacceptable. Michelle, crossing her arms, got angry. As I was about to counter her rudeness, Michelle suddenly had a realization and abruptly changed her attitude. Well, whatever. I'm glad I got to see your face, sis. Bye. With that, she left as suddenly as she had come. What was that all about? She's always like a hurricane. I felt relieved for the moment and started preparing for the wedding I was looking forward to. Not thinking deeply about why Michelle, who never stops once she starts, had left so easily. Then, the weekend arrived. It was the day for the much-anticipated wedding meeting. I was supposed to meet my fiancé Hadley directly at the church, the venue for our wedding. The church where we would have our wedding was designated as a National Historic Landmark, with a venerable history. Stepping inside, I felt the weight of history and the serene atmosphere making me straighten my back.
I can't believe I get to have my wedding here. I'm so lucky.
As I murmured, I heard footsteps behind me. "Hey, Roseanne!" It was my fiancé, Hadley, calling out to me with a smile. "Hadley, thanks for taking time out of your busy weekend." "It's for our important wedding, Roseanne." Everyone was happy to give me the time off. Hadley and I walked together towards the office where the planner was waiting. Like any couple having a wedding, Hadley and I were no exception in wanting to infuse our personal touches into the ceremony. We planned to have the ceremony at the historic church and the reception in its garden. Since the venue was so prestigious, we chose elegant dresses, tuxedos, and bouquets to match. We also meticulously selected the food, wedding favors, wedding cake, and table flowers to ensure our guests would enjoy themselves. "Oh, but all the dresses are so beautiful. Maybe I'll wear them all." "That sounds great. You'd be like a peacock, very eye-catching." "Hadley, that was a joke. You were supposed to laugh." Hadley, who is a bit absent-minded but incredibly gentle, never complains no matter how much I waver. "I chose the venue, so I want the ceremony to be as close to your wishes as possible." When he says things like that, I feel like I want to spend the rest of my life with Hadley. Everything was going smoothly in our meeting until a sudden dark cloud loomed over us. "Oh! There you are!" "Hey, is that Michelle's sister and her dropout fiancé?" I turned around at the sound of noisy footsteps and chatter, and there stood Michelle with an unfamiliar man. "Michelle! What are you doing here?" "I thought I'd come and oversee your wedding planning." "How did you know where and when the meeting was?" I asked in shock, and Michelle just laughed nonchalantly. "When I visited home last time, your planner was left open, and I saw the details."
Damn it.
I regretted it from the bottom of my heart. I had left the wedding materials and planner spread out on the living room table, forgetting Michelle's sharp eyes. "So, who is this?" Although I had a pretty good guess, I asked about the man standing next to Michelle with his hair in a side part. "This is my boyfriend, no, fiancé, Jed." "Nice to meet you, sis." The man, in an expensive suit with a smug smile, called me sis, and I was stunned. "When did you get engaged?" "On the way back from visiting home. When I saw the wedding brochures, I wanted to get married too." "You decided on something like that so casually." "If you want to do something, move immediately." Michelle's astonishing decisiveness left me in shock as her fiancé, Jed, gave a cocky smile. "Well, for elites like us. I mean, intellectual leaders, marriage is a simple matter." Hearing that, I understood why Michelle's boyfriend was a perfect match for her. They both love to throw around words like elite and educational background. And now I understood why Michelle had started using the term intellectual leaders. It must have been picked up from her fiancé to sound more impressive. "Anyway, I'm also getting married at this church." "What?" I was taken aback by Michelle's sudden declaration as I was analyzing her and her fiancé. "It's fine for sisters to have the same venue, but you'll set your date apart, right? Like a year later?" "No way. I don't want to go after you, sis. I'll have mine before your ceremony." "What are you talking about?" Seeing my shock, Michelle laughed. "I mean, sis, you're marrying a dropout, right? I don't want to follow you after you've settled for someone like that." As I trembled with anger, Hadley gently touched my shoulder to calm me down. "Let's both calm down a bit. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to neglect your dropout fiancé. Even though he's my sister's fiancé, Michelle didn't seem to care about making a proper introduction. But Hadley, always courteous, started to speak to Michelle. Nice to meet you. I'm Hadley, Roseanne's fiancé. Michelle, you said you'd have your ceremony before ours. Was there an open reservation? Michelle looked down at the ever-polite Hadley with a mocking smile. In this world, there's something called a waiting list. The spot exactly 1 week before your scheduled date was available. When you book a venue, it's common sense to check if any good dates have cancellations, right? Michelle's fiancé joined in with a creepy laugh. However, Hadley tilted his head in confusion in front of the two of them.
Oh, there were cancellations? In that case, we might be able to book it.
Hadley muttered to himself, and Michelle and her fiancé Jed laughed mockingly. Just as we thought, Sis's fiancé is exactly as we imagined. He's kinda spacey, typical for someone who dropped out. Hey, since you dropped out, do you even know calculus? Can you say sine, cosine, tangent? Michelle and Jed laughed crudely, and I glared at them with all my might. Enough! If you keep causing a ruckus, get out! Michelle looked at me, blazing with anger, and exaggeratedly shrugged her shoulders. Scary! Sis, you're really worried about marrying a dropout, aren't you? You shouldn't marry out of desperation, sis. Feeling completely drained, I had no words left for these two who couldn't understand a thing. All right, let's accomplish what we came here for today. Completely carefree, Michelle started taking pictures of our wedding planning documents on the desk. What are you doing? These are important documents for our wedding. Hadley tried to stop her, but Michelle pushed him aside and continued taking pictures. I don't have time until the wedding. You get that, right? Michelle's strange statement made me step closer to her. What do you mean? Why does not having time mean you need to take pictures of our wedding plans? It's too hard to come up with everything now, so I'll just copy you guys. I was left speechless again, for what felt like the 100th time today. Could I really be rendered speechless so frequently in my life? This bouquet design is nice. And we'll order the table flowers from the same place. The wedding cake is stylish too. It's more fitting for a university graduate like me than for a dropout groom. Satisfied, Michelle and Jed left just as noisily as they had arrived.
No way. They're having the same setup a week before us. This can't be real.
Getting married at the church a week before us is true, but they'll probably just use our ideas as inspiration, right? Hadley and I thought even those two would know the difference between right and wrong. I was used to being pushed around by Michelle's selfishness. I felt sorry for Hadley, but I decided to give up on Michelle and her fiancé having their wedding a week before ours. Just as I began to think about apologizing to our relatives for the burden of having two sisters' weddings so close together, I received a call from the florist I had found on social media, who specialized in weddings. An order came in for the exact same design a week before your wedding? I had requested a particularly unique bouquet and table flowers from that florist. The same design had been ordered for the week before my wedding, so she called to confirm if it was a prank. The person who placed the order, is their name Michelle? I asked hesitantly, and she confirmed it was.
No way.
A terrible feeling washed over me, so I called the dress shop where I had reserved my rental dress. As expected, every dress I had reserved had been rented out by Michelle for her wedding a week before mine. I also called the store where I reserved the wedding cake, and it turned out they had received an order for the exact same cake a week before I placed mine. She really copied everything. I let my anger take over and called Michelle. Hello? Michelle answered with her usual carefree voice, and I immediately felt my anger rising. Michelle, did you really copy our entire wedding plan? I told you, I didn't have time to come up with something from scratch, so I decided to use yours. Michelle's voice sounded unapologetic, which made me even angrier. It's one thing to get married at the same church, but don't copy everything Hadley and I worked so hard to plan. And your wedding is a week before mine. Showing up in the same dress, bouquet, and with the same cake is going to make us look ridiculous. Michelle dismissed my seriousness with a cheerful tone. There's something I wanted to say to you too. I tried ordering the same stuff, but sis, aren't you spending a bit too much on the wedding? How dare you? And no, we have a budget, and everything is within that. That's fine, but that amount of money shouldn't be spent by someone marrying a college dropout. You'll need money for lots of things in the future. I could practically see Michelle's smug face through the phone. Speechless with anger, I listened as Michelle continued confidently. The wedding isn't the end goal. Sis, you're marrying a dropout and you're going to have a life full of compromises. Why do you have to say such things? Our plan was perfect for elites like us. If you don't want to be compared, maybe you should reconsider your venue and plans to something more modest. No way. The venue is non-negotiable, and Hadley and I put our hearts into this plan. Michelle laughed as if cutting me off. What's the point of putting effort into a wedding with a dropout? Michelle, that's enough. I clutched the phone tightly after Michelle hung up, pacing the living room in fury. Once I calmed down a bit, I called my fiancé Hadley. What's wrong? Hearing Hadley's calm voice almost brought me to tears. Hadley, it's Michelle. I explained to Hadley how Michelle had copied everything about our wedding. I see. We can't let this slide. Exactly. But what can we do? In that case, let's call Michelle and her fiancé to our next planning meeting. What? We then meticulously planned our strategy over the phone. Got it. We'll make Michelle regret doing this. Feeling much more determined, I ended the call with Hadley. On the day of our wedding planning meeting. Why did you call Jed and me here? We're really busy. Michelle and her fiancé Jed were extremely annoyed at being summoned to the church office. We wanted to talk to you about copying our entire wedding plan. I looked at the two calmly. We didn't have time until the wedding, so we adopted your ideas. That's right. That plan isn't suitable for someone marrying a dropout, so you should go for a simpler wedding. Seeing them sitting there so arrogantly, Hadley and I decided to tease them a little. Our wedding is something we designed for ourselves. It's something that fits us, and I think everyone will be happy with it. That's right. We thought about having a wedding that suits us at this historic church. As expected, Michelle and Jed started laughing at our words. That wedding that suits you, does Sis's fiancé even have a proper job? I've been wondering that. What kind of job can a college dropout get? To the laughing pair, Hadley calmly replied. In simple terms, helping out with the family business. Helping out with the family business? You mean like being a homemaker? Michelle exaggeratedly leaned back. She then leaned in close to Jed and laughed mockingly. See, a dropout with no proper work experience. Yeah, Michelle wisely chose an elite like me, but Sis doesn't have the same eye for quality. Marrying someone unemployed, unbelievable. No matter how rude their comments were, Hadley and I didn't mind. In fact, thinking about what was to come, we almost wanted them to keep going. I do contribute to society, you know. When Hadley laughed, Michelle and Jed only got more encouraged. Being a homemaker doesn't count as a job, you know that, right? We, the intellectual elite, keep society running, while you are just a burden. We didn't realize there were such representatives of burdens. Good thing we're in the intellectual elite. We, the intellectual elite, never had to deal with such people, but now, thanks to Sis's marriage, we're related. Having a non-intellectual elite in the family is a problem. Right. The intellectual elite's family interactions should be with the intellectual elite, and only with the intellectual elite. Michelle and Jed were getting so carried away, I started losing track of what they were saying.
I just heard intellectual elite so many times.
Just as I was clutching my head, we heard heavy footsteps behind us. How disgraceful to use such distasteful words. I'm ashamed of my own daughter. Dad. Michelle turned around, startled by the voice. Why is Dad here? Hadley and I asked him to come. We wanted him to see how you and your fiancé behave. I thought this might calm them down a bit, but Michelle and Jed's attitude remained unchanged. Perfect timing, Dad. Did you know Sis's fiancé is a college dropout? My fiancé Jed is a graduate of an exclusive intellectual elite university. This is the first time you're meeting him, right? Nice to meet you, Dad. I'm Jed, a graduate of an exclusive intellectual elite university. We'll be having our ceremony here at this church a week before Roseanne's, so I look forward to it. Laughing as he introduced himself, Jed made Dad scowl deeply. So, you're the one Michelle chose. Pathetic. You two are a perfect match. It's pathetic to think that, too. Hey, Dad. What's pathetic about it? Sis is the one who's pathetic. That's right. Roseanne is marrying a dropout who helps with household chores. Is there anything more pathetic? Despite Michelle and Jed's persistence, Dad, usually calm, raised his voice with a stern face. Stop calling Hadley a dropout and unemployed. Michelle, a bit taken aback by Dad's anger, still continued to argue with her characteristic defiance. We're not saying anything wrong. A dropout helping with household chores has no future. They're even pushing to have a wedding. So, Michelle, you're planning to sabotage Roseanne's wedding by copying everything? How does Dad know? Apparently, Michelle wanted to keep it a secret and have the ceremony without us knowing. Michelle glared at me with a sharp look, but I'm no longer intimidated by that. I consulted Dad. It's not just about me, it's about the family's reputation. What does it matter about the reputation of someone who dropped out and is unemployed? It was Dad who finally reached his limit with Michelle's insults towards Hadley. Enough already! How dare you insult someone so outstanding by calling them a dropout and unemployed? Do you not understand Hadley's position? So, Sis's fiancé is just helping around the house, right? You don't even know the difference between helping with the family business and helping around the house. Hadley is not just helping with the family business, he is the head of it. Oh really? And what kind of business is that? Gardening or something? It's this church you're in right now. Dad's loud voice seemed to pass right through Michelle and Jed's heads, leaving them both stunned. What? What about this church? Well, Hadley is the pastor of this church. I made sure to clearly state the fact so it would reach Michelle and Jed's stunned minds. A pastor? That's a pretty important position, Michelle exclaimed, and Jed started to get agitated too. How can someone who dropped out become an important person at a church? Seeing them calm down and talk to Hadley, it seemed they finally understood his position. To make things clearer, I began explaining in detail. This is a historic church, right? Hadley was born to inherit it. Hadley, standing beside me, added with an embarrassed smile. When I was in high school, a family tragedy happened, and I had to take over suddenly. That's why I dropped out of high school. Wait a minute, working at a church requires some qualifications, right? I know that much. Michelle was still trying to find faults, with a smug look on her face. Hadley, however, continued to explain calmly. Yes, to obtain the necessary qualifications at a young age, I attended a theological seminary. A theological seminary? What's that? With a lot of confusion evident on Michelle and Jed's faces, Hadley continued talking. To get into the seminary, I needed recommendations and proof of high school level education, so I took the General Educational Development (GED) test when I was 16. Hold on, what? Still seeing confusion on the so-called elites' faces, I couldn't help but feel exasperated. In other words, Hadley had the same qualifications as a high school graduate at the age of 16. Do you get how exceptional that is? Yeah, it's amazing that someone like him is going to be our brother-in-law. Beside Jed, who had changed his attitude, Michelle ground her teeth in frustration. But isn't church work easy? We're still intellectually superior. Michelle, you're still saying that. Dad was furious at Michelle's desperate attempts to assert her superiority. Hadley is an esteemed pastor of a historic church and has been a great help to our company. Yet you continue to disrespect him. Facing Dad's shaking anger. But... Michelle still muttered. Turning away from Michelle, Dad apologized to Hadley. Hadley, please forgive my daughter's rudeness. I promise Michelle will not come near this church again. Wait a minute. We're having our wedding here. I'm definitely going to make sure it gets canceled. Dad said firmly to Michelle, who looked like she was about to start a commotion. Seeing this, that's right. Hadley nodded. Michelle and her fiancé, Jed, probably don't want to be associated with a dropout like me. Maybe it's better this way. They wouldn't want to have their wedding at a church where a dropout is the minister, right? Seeing Hadley say this with a smile, Michelle finally seemed to realize the reality. No way, I want to have a better wedding here than Sis. I've already bragged to my friends. No. Michelle stomped her feet in frustration. Her behavior could only be described as pathetic. Give it up. Besides, it's our fault too, for always giving in whenever Michelle threw a fit. Dad, we're already in tears here, just let us have the wedding. Having people with prestigious backgrounds as relatives would be a plus for the minister of this church, wouldn't it? Jed, rubbing his hands together, approached Dad. What's a plus about it? It's nothing but a minus. Besides, you have no right to call me Dad. It's ridiculous. You two didn't even properly announce your engagement, and now you're here laughing like fools, expecting to have a wedding here? Seeing that crying wasn't going to work with the enraged Dad, Michelle stopped her tears and began making excuses. But we suddenly decided to get married, and we were busy, and we don't really know how to do formal greetings. Even as Michelle pouted and made excuses, Dad glared at her. Enough. We don't need uneducated relatives who only want to use the term intellectual elite to sound important. Michelle, our family is cutting ties with you. At Dad's sudden declaration of disownment, Michelle turned pale. No way, Dad, you're joking. I wouldn't say something like this as a joke. Spend some time alone and think about how terrible you've been treating people. With Dad's declaration of disownment, Michelle and Jed turned pale and started to panic. No, I can't stand it. Dad, I love being the daughter of a CEO in the intellectual elite. I don't care. Your like-minded husband is from that intellectual elite, right? Now you can brag about being the wife of an intellectual elite. Jed turned even paler at Dad's words as he turned away.
This is bad, Michelle. I quit my job because I thought your dad was a CEO. If we're disowned, I'll be unemployed. Are you kidding? I just submitted my resignation because I thought I'd be a housewife after marrying you. The resignation process is already complete.
As Michelle and Jed started to insult each other, we just watched them.
You two, what a reckless move.
I said, exasperated, and Hadley nodded gently. Like a catapult.
Hadley, that's a hard-to-understand metaphor.
In the end, Michelle and Jed, who kept making a fuss, were taken away by the furious Dad. And as planned, Hadley and I were able to have our dream wedding at the church where Hadley serves as a minister. Relatives and friends all praised the beautiful ceremony and enjoyed it. I am filled with joy and happiness. Of course, Michelle did not attend. Free from the long-standing trouble, I feel honestly relieved. Michelle and Jed, despite their impressive educational backgrounds, are struggling to find new jobs because of their Everest-sized pride. There was one time when I answered one of the many calls from Michelle. Hello?
Finally, sis, you answered. Could you lend me some money? We're struggling to cover living expenses, but I promise I'll pay you back soon.
Michelle, speaking rapidly, seemed to be having a hard time giving up her love for a flashy lifestyle even after becoming unemployed.
Oh, so now you're crying to me, the one who chose a college dropout? Where's your pride?
I replied coldly, making Michelle stumble over her words.
But I didn't know Hadley was a dropout. I'm sorry. As a pastor's wife, you must be well off, right? Could you just help a little?
Determined that this would be the last time, I cleared my throat and took a deep breath.
Stop whining! If you want to call yourselves intellectual leaders, bite the bullet, get a job, and contribute to society.
I could hear Michelle gasp on the other end of the line. Satisfied with my response, I hung up the phone. Since then, I haven't heard from Michelle at all. Hadley and I have been busy working to support our church. Hadley, though sometimes a bit absent-minded, is a really handsome pastor. To support him better, I've started attending a college to get my own pastor's qualifications. It's a hectic but fulfilling time, and working toward our goals makes me very happy. I had just finished dinner alone and was getting ready for bed while watching my favorite drama on TV when suddenly, I heard a loud banging on the front door. To check what was going on, I quickly put on a light jacket, changed from slippers to sandals, and walked to the door, asking,
"Who is it?"
without opening it. Then, from the pitch-black, stormy night outside, I barely heard a voice saying, "Grandma." It was the voice of my grandchild, Emily. As soon as I opened the front door, I saw Emily standing there, tears streaming down her face. I quickly pulled her into the house to shield her from the strong night wind and calmed her down before asking what had happened. It was clear that something urgent had brought her to my house alone at such a late hour. Even though I was worried about her little body being out in the strong wind, I wrapped her in a blanket to warm her up and listened to her story.
Emily, what happened? Why are you here alone at this hour? Where's your mom?
Mom isn't moving. She collapsed. Upon hearing that, I couldn't sit still and drove Emily to her mother's house to check on her. As Emily led me to the living room, I immediately saw Grace lying on the floor.
Grace? Grace! Emily, where's your dad?
In this situation, there's no way her husband, Bobby, wouldn't be around.
Dad hit Mom, then left the house, saying she'd wake up soon. Then he went to work.
Hearing that, a shock like lightning ran through my body.
Mrs. White. Mrs. White. Mrs. Frances White. Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm coming.
In the waiting room of our regular hospital, whether on weekdays or weekends, it's always crowded, which naturally means long waiting times. Usually, I kill time with the numerous magazines and TV provided by the hospital, but once those become boring, there's nothing left to do but wait. In such times, the only way to pass the time is to use my phone. I used to read the news, but lately, I've been obsessed with something Grace introduced to me: social media. As a result, I sometimes miss the nurse calling my name.
Mrs. White, thank you for coming to your regular checkup. Your health seems fine. By the way, I heard from the nurse that you've been quite into social media lately. Yes, that's right. Grace taught me about it.
The reason I started using social media. It wasn't just because Grace told me it was fun. It was also because the man Grace married happens to be a somewhat famous influencer. Before getting married, Grace had no interest in social media, and she would often wonder aloud during our lunchtime variety shows why it was so popular. However, when the topic of marriage or relationships came up on the show, her demeanor would change. She used to laugh along, but suddenly, she'd sigh and look at the magazines on the table. Grace had a history of dating several men, but none of those relationships led to marriage. Each one ended within 3 years, and she often lamented her bad luck with men. But recently, those complaints have stopped, and she avoids marriage-related topics on TV or in magazines, almost as if she's unconsciously blocking them out. Has she given up on marriage, or has she grown tired of the idea? Seeing Grace react so strongly against marriage makes it difficult for me to ask if she's met anyone new recently. Despite this, I still want Grace to marry and build a happy family. I wish for this because my own marriage with my late husband was so happy, and I want Grace to find the same kind of happiness. However, as a parent, I don't want to force it upon her. I wish there was a good way to help. Thinking about all this, it was time for my regular hospital visit. I took an eco bag with me to stop by the grocery store on the way back. As I checked in and waited in the reception area for my turn, I overheard a small conversation between the receptionists. Usually, I wouldn't pay attention, but today, for some reason, I found myself intrigued by their conversation. They were talking about something that had been on TV lately: dating apps.
I was so desperate for a boyfriend that I finally tried a dating app. What? You hadn't tried one yet? I've been using one for a while now.
I knew about dating apps from TV, but I didn't understand how they worked or how people met through them. Curious, I looked up dating apps on my phone. This is it. I couldn't sit still, even though my turn might be called any moment, so I asked the receptionist to explain dating apps to me. I left the hospital and, forgetting all about dinner shopping, went straight home. Grace, who had taken the day off to clean the house, looked puzzled as she saw me return empty-handed, despite saying I'd stop by the grocery store after my appointment.
Mom, you said you were going to the grocery store. Why did you come back with nothing? Did you forget your wallet?
Grace, why don't you try a dating app?
What?
Grace never expected her mom to suggest a dating app. However, as I saw Grace's face, she didn't seem like she had completely given up on marriage. She looked almost cheerful. Although she initially said no, as I kept talking about the app and sharing stories from the receptionists about how they met their boyfriends, I could see Grace's expression change, showing clear interest. After dinner, I went to the bathroom. When I came back to the living room, I caught a glimpse of Grace's phone screen. It seemed she had downloaded the dating app while I was in the bathroom and was setting it up. Noticing my presence, Grace quickly hid her phone and gave me a suspicious look as I grinned.
What's with that look? I didn't start it because you suggested it. I had been curious about it for a while.
Sure, I get it. So, have you found anyone interesting yet? Well, it's not that easy. I just started. Even though she seemed skeptical, Grace's face looked happy as she used the app, which made me feel cheerful too. A week later. Friday evening. As I was preparing dinner, Grace came home from work, threw her bags at the door, and rushed over to show me her phone.
Mom, what should I do? I've been asked out on a date.
She had matched with a man on the dating app one suggested, and he had asked her out for a date this Sunday. Surprised and happy, I decided to make Grace's favorite meal to celebrate and boost her spirits for the upcoming date. The big day arrived. Grace pulled out stylish clothes and accessories she hadn't worn since she stopped dating, put on perfect makeup for the first time in ages, and, with trembling hands from nervousness, headed out for her date. As I watched her leave, I could only hope for a good outcome. That night, my heart wouldn't stop pounding, and I ended up drinking alone for the first time in years to calm my nerves and fall asleep. When I woke up, sunlight was peeking through the curtains. I went to check Grace's room, but she wasn't back yet. It was just before 6 a.m. I remembered Grace telling me she had taken the morning off, and thinking she might be in the arms of her date now brought back the same excitement I felt while watching a drama. I had an early breakfast while watching the morning entertainment show, did some chores, and waited for Grace to come home. After a while, Grace came back home, and from the sparkle in her eyes, I could tell her date was a success. She noticed me, flashed a V sign without saying a word, and then headed to the bathroom for a shower before her afternoon work started. That's great, Grace. After that, Grace had a serious relationship with the man she dated and got married a year later. The man she brought home to introduce to me before their marriage was someone who had recently become famous for his social media streaming, and although I wasn't very familiar with the internet, he was apparently quite a well-known figure. At first, I was a bit worried about whether his job could really support a family, but as soon as I heard about his income from Grace, all my concerns vanished. Bobby's job brings in that much income? I'm surprised. Grace hadn't expected to connect with a famous influencer through a dating app either, and she mentioned how surprised she was when she heard about his job from him. They had a grand wedding, which Bobby posted about on his social media, drawing a lot of attention and even making it to online news. To avoid causing trouble for Grace by exposing her identity to the public, Bobby decided not to disclose much about her and chose to live in a condominium close to my house. Thanks to that, Grace wasn't bothered by Bobby's fans and could live a peaceful life. A year after their marriage, they were blessed with a child, whom they named Emily. After the baby was born, Bobby actively participated in childcare, and when he posted about it on social media, he became even more popular, leading to more promotional offers from companies. Grace, at Bobby's suggestion, quit her job to become a housewife and took care of the household and childcare. Whenever she had questions about these unfamiliar tasks, she would come to me for advice, and I felt happy to see her growth up close. However, as Bobby's work got busier and their home became more affluent, Grace began to feel that Bobby's attitude towards the family was becoming distant. Grace would visit me to talk about her worries, but at that time, I would tell her that it was only natural for someone to become busy with work, just as my late husband had. When work settles down, Bobby will return to his old self. Let's focus on the household for now, and I'll help you. Yeah, you're right. He will return to normal. At that time, I couldn't see the depth of Grace's feelings. That's why I carelessly uttered those words without any real basis. 6 months had passed since Grace first came to me with her concerns. We used to have regular video calls with Grace, Emily, and me whenever we had the time, enjoying conversations and hearing about Emily's growth, but that had gradually stopped due to their busy schedules. One day, something urgent came up, and despite being asked to call before visiting, I went to Grace's house without prior notice.
I'm sorry for coming suddenly. I had an urgent matter.
No, it's fine. When I visited their home, I noticed something odd about Grace and Emily's behavior. Sensing that something was off, I didn't ask any questions and was about to enter the house when Bobby came out of the living room with a guilty look on his face.
Francis, I've always told you to call before coming over. I sometimes work from home. I'm sorry, I forgot to call because it was urgent. I'll make sure to remember next time.
Bobby frowned and went back to the living room to resume his work, and we finished our business in another room to avoid disturbing him. Then, we spent some time together as a family for the first time in a while. In the time I hadn't seen her, Emily had grown even more adorable, and her sweet smile was almost too bright for my old eyes. Grace, too, looked more like a mother than ever before. After about an hour of talking, Bobby knocked on the door and said,
"I'm going out,"
and left.
"I've finished my business, so I should head home. There are other things I need to do."
"Okay, Mom?" Just as I was about to leave, Grace hesitated as if she wanted to say something.
"Yes? What is it?"
"No, I'll talk to you if I have any more problems." I left, still feeling the unease from earlier, but I didn't ask them anything more and went on to my next task. On the bus, I saw Bobby's social media post. It was a picture of a happy family, completely different from the tense atmosphere I had felt earlier. Seeing the post, I naively thought they must have had a minor argument before I arrived and made up afterwards. This assumption was proven wrong a week later on a night when strong winds rattled the windows, and a loud noise echoed through the house. I had just finished dinner alone and was getting ready for bed while watching my favorite drama on TV when suddenly, I heard a loud banging on the front door. With the wind blowing hard outside, at first, I thought it was some trash being blown against the door. But the knocking continued, clearly not just debris hitting the door. To check what was going on, I quickly put on a light jacket, changed from slippers to sandals, and walked to the door, asking,
"Who is it?"
without opening it. Then, from the pitch-black, stormy night outside, I barely heard a voice saying, "Grandma." I had heard this voice before. In fact, I was certain there was no way I could be mistaken. It was Emily's voice. As soon as I opened the front door, I saw Emily standing there, tears streaming down her face. I quickly pulled her into the house to shield her from the strong night wind and calmed her down before asking what had happened. It was clear that something urgent had brought her to my house alone at such a late hour. Even though I was worried about her little body being out in the strong wind, I wrapped her in a blanket to warm her up and listened to her story.
"Emily, what happened? Why are you here alone at this hour? Where's your mom?"
Mom isn't moving. She collapsed." Emily's trembling voice managed to get those words out. Upon hearing that, I couldn't sit still and drove Emily to Grace's condominium to check on her. When we arrived, Emily used her key to open the entrance lock, and we rushed to their apartment, banging on the door. I thought that maybe Grace had woken up during the time Emily had come to my house. But after knocking several times, there was no response from inside. Emily used her key, and although I felt bad about entering without permission, I couldn't afford to think about that now, worried about Grace's safety. Following Emily's lead, I hurried to the living room, where we immediately saw Grace lying on the floor.
"Grace? Grace! Emily, where's your dad?"
In this situation, there was no way her husband, Bobby, wouldn't be around. Dad hit Mom, then left the house, saying she'd wake up soon. Then he went to work. Hearing that, a shock like lightning ran through my body. Although many thoughts crossed my mind, I was primarily worried about Grace's condition, so I quickly called an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctors found that Grace had suffered a severe head injury likely caused by the fall, resulting in internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. Grace was taken to the operating room, and the surgery was expected to take several hours. The red light outside the operating room cast a dim glow in the dark hospital, making my and Emily's hearts churn like a stormy sea. Several hours later, Grace was brought out on a gurney, accompanied by doctors and nurses. Emily and I stood there, stunned. The surgeon informed us that while the surgery was successful, Grace was still in a critical condition, hovering between life and death. As we watched Grace being moved to her hospital room, a mix of emotions overwhelmed us, but I decided to try contacting Bobby. However, despite repeated attempts, I couldn't reach him, so I stayed by Grace's side for several days, while Emily continued to go to school from the hospital. The nurses noticed the odd situation of a patient whose chart indicated 2 parents, but only one was present, but they didn't pry into our private matters. Still, I couldn't get in touch with Bobby. Eventually, I managed to get in direct contact with Bobby a few days after Grace was hospitalized. Amidst my numerous voicemails, he must have heard one and showed up at the hospital, feigning concern in front of the nurses. However, despite being at the hospital, he showed no real concern for Grace's condition, only speaking to her briefly, acting so indifferent that it was hard to believe he was her husband.
Bobby, are you really here because you're worried about Grace, or is there something inconvenient that you're worried about if she wakes up?
Without flinching, he coldly responded, "She hurt herself," leaving me in disbelief. Why? Because Emily's testimony clearly indicated that Bobby was responsible. There was no way pure-hearted Emily would lie. Even if she had lied, she had nothing to gain from it, and considering she had braved the storm to come to my house for help, it was clear she was telling the truth.
I've called you repeatedly, but you didn't return any calls. Where have you been while Grace is in this state?
When I pressed him, Bobby sighed as if annoyed and pulled out a notebook and a business card holder from his bag. The notebook was filled with times and places, detailing exactly where he had been on the night Emily came to my house. That night, Bobby had been out dining with fellow influencers. For several days, he had been attending networking events and gatherings with influencers who had more followers and fame than him. Additionally, it came to light that Bobby had been hiding many things. He had bought expensive equipment for filming his social media content and high-end accessories and clothes to avoid being overshadowed by other influencers at networking events. Receipts for these purchases were found. Realizing he couldn't hide it any longer, Bobby began to confess everything he had been hiding, including the circumstances that led to Grace's collapse. He revealed that the costs of buying accessories and equipment had spiraled out of control, and despite earning from sponsored posts, he had secretly taken loans from a finance company, leading to arguments when Grace found out. There had been continuous arguments about social media and debt, and Bobby's attitude towards Grace and Emily had become increasingly harsh. While his social media posts depicted a happy family, the reality was vastly different, creating a significant emotional rift. On the day Grace collapsed and Emily came to seek help, Grace had pleaded with Bobby to quit social media to save their family, but he had lashed out violently and then went to a networking event. It wasn't just that. Dad kicked her when she grabbed his leg while she was down, shouting, "Let go." Emily's further revelations added to the secrets Bobby had already confessed. He instinctively tried to cover Emily's mouth to stop her from saying more, but a male nurse in the room restrained him. The doctor, deeming it dangerous for Bobby to act out, instructed the nurse to call the police, and a few minutes later, Bobby was taken into custody. Following this, with my accompaniment, Emily provided a detailed account of the events to the police, leading to the case being officially treated as a domestic violence incident. Although not reported by the media, Bobby was effectively forced into a hiatus from his activities. While he ceased his social media updates to contain the situation, I felt it was necessary to expose the truth to the public. I bought a phone for Emily and suggested she reveal Bobby's true nature herself. Initially, I considered going to the media, but I feared it would infringe on Grace and Emily's privacy. Instead, I sent a disclosure letter to the companies that had sponsored Bobby. The effect was immediate. Bobby received numerous inquiries from sponsors, and once they confirmed Emily's revelations were true, their trust in him plummeted. Already under mental strain from police questioning, Bobby was devastated when companies started demanding compensation for breach of contract. His social network and connections crumbled, and Bobby cursed his actions. Emily and I visited the hospital every day, desperately trying to bring Grace back from the brink of death. We believed that if we kept talking to her, she would eventually wake up. We prepared changes of clothes and kept talking to Grace, believing she would wake up someday. One day, after finishing all the household chores in the morning, Emily and I headed to the hospital, as her school was also on break. We had become familiar faces to the receptionists. As we rode the elevator to Grace's hospital room, we heard voices from inside. Curious, we entered to find Grace awake, cheerfully talking to a nurse. Seeing Grace awake, Emily forgot she was in a hospital and ran to her, crying tears of joy as she hugged her recovering mother.
Mom! I'm so glad! I'm so glad!
Mom, Emily. I'm sorry for worrying you. But I'm okay now. I heard Emily helped me. Emily is my hero, thank you.
I was so worried, Grace.
Mom, thank you so much for taking care of Emily too. Emily and I hugged Grace tightly, vowing never to let something like this happen again, and explained everything that had occurred while she was unconscious. But there was no need to say much. Grace had already made up her mind. Bobby needed to understand that everything he did would come back to him. Grace filed for divorce and demanded substantial alimony as a victim of domestic violence. In exchange for never seeing Emily again, she demanded a significant increase in child support, further inflating Bobby's debt, which had already soared due to the breach of contract fines. Having inflicted violence and publicly lied about his family, Bobby had brought this upon himself. Grace threw the divorce papers at Bobby as he was being taken into police custody, ending their marriage. Later, the divorce papers, properly filled out and signed by Bobby, were sent back to Grace, officially ending their marriage and making them strangers. Since Bobby had rented the apartment under his name, Grace and Emily moved in with me once Grace had recovered. Fortunately, I had plenty of room to spare. Grace took one of the 2 available rooms as her own, and Emily moved into the room Grace used when she was a child. They often talked about Grace's childhood, bringing laughter and joy. As for Bobby, he paid his bail but lost all credibility. Having built his career as a family-oriented influencer, he couldn't continue his work after the divorce and was left despondent. He tried to get a job in corporate PR using his influencer skills, but his bad reputation had already spread, and he was turned down at every interview. Once living a luxurious influencer life, Bobby now faced poverty and even came to my house, seeking help. However, we decided we had no obligation to help him and called the police when he wouldn't leave. As the police took him away again, his figure seemed much smaller than the man who once flaunted his wealth and status. We might not live as luxuriously as before, but the 3 of us vowed to support each other and live even happier lives together.
Goodbye, Grandma.
My MIL Rebecca stood there frozen, watching my son Ryan wave cheerfully as he left the house. Take care, Rebecca. I said my final goodbyes to her. Rebecca didn't understand the true meaning behind my words, so she contacted me again later. I'm Ashley. I'm a 37-year-old housewife who works at an architectural firm. Smile, smile. My smile brings happiness to my family. I say this magic phrase while practicing my smile in front of the mirror. This morning routine was taught to me by my grandma.
Ashley, you're neither unfortunate nor pitiable. So don't cry. Come on, give me a smile.
These words of encouragement from my grandma, given to me when I came home crying from school after being teased about not having parents, have supported me throughout my life. My grandma, always cheerful and bright, was like the sun to me. She passed away 2 years ago. She followed Grandpa to heaven soon after he died. The sadness of losing them both still hasn't healed. However, I have a loving husband and wonderful children. My husband Jeffrey is 2 years older than me and works as an architect at a construction company. My daughter Melissa is 10 years old. She's going through her preteen and rebellious phase, but is responsible and takes good care of her younger brother. My son Ryan just turned 3. He's always following her sister Melissa around, never leaving her side. Having a normal, happy family was my dream since I was a child. That had been my dream since childhood. And with that dream realized, I believed that my family of 4 could live a happy life together forever. But our happy times didn't last long. My Fael, Nicholas, who had been battling stomach cancer, passed away. Even though he had been fighting the illness for 3 years, losing such a supportive presence was a great sorrow for our family. But we couldn't afford to stay sad forever. Rebecca, who was now alone in the house, suggested that we move in with her. This reminded me of when Jeffrey and I were dating and visited his parents' house to announce our engagement. The moment I sat on the living room sofa, Rebecca started questioning me rapidly, as if she were an interviewer at a job interview. Ashley, do you also have the same first-class architect certification as Jeffrey?
Yes, I do.
Really? That's impressive for a woman.
No, it's nothing special.
By the way, what do your parents do? What does your dad do for a living?
My parents divorced when I was 2, and I was adopted by my dad's parents after that.
The moment I said this, Rebecca's expression turned stern. So, where are your parents now?
I haven't seen my mom in a long time, so I don't know where she is. My dad remarried and lives with his new family now.
If you haven't seen your mom in so long, does that mean she was the cause of the divorce? Did she have another lover or something? Otherwise, she wouldn't abandon her child, right?
Huh?
I was at a loss for words. Because everything Rebecca said was true.
Hey, it's rude to pry into someone's family matters, Nicholas scolded her. Mom, stop. Besides, Grandpa and Grandma, who raised Ashley, were wonderful people, Jeffrey added.
Whether Rebecca didn't hear them or pretended not to, she continued.
Well, they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. What if your daughter ends up like your mom?
Rebecca spoke loudly enough that it didn't seem like a mere soliloquy.
That's enough! Ashley, I'm sorry. She means no harm, but she can be sharp-tongued.
It's okay, really. After that exchange, Nicholas and Jeffrey persuaded her to reluctantly accept our marriage. However, Rebecca, who refused to acknowledge me as Jeffrey's wife, said, "I have no intention of living with a stranger like you," and rejected our proposal for cohabitation. When we discussed building a new home, "Do whatever you want," she only said. Yet, when Jeffrey's younger brother Joshua got engaged,
Stephanie's parents come from a good family and they're still together. She's truly a fitting wife for Joshua.
Rebecca said. Despite this, after Nicholas passed away, Rebecca suddenly said,
Ashley, you're Jeffrey's wife, so it's only natural for you to take care of me. Mom, that's too selfish.
Jeffrey, usually gentle and never one to raise his voice, spoke up for me. That was then, and this is now.
I never expected Nicholas to pass away so soon.
Rebecca responded nonchalantly.
It's not like I'm asking you to live with me forever. Just until Joshua and Stephanie return from the US for a few years.
You can't complain about that, can you? Right, Ashley? Caught off guard, I couldn't bring myself to voice any objections. In the end, we started living together in the in-laws' house, which was a 10-minute drive from our home, with the condition that it would only be until Joshua and Stephanie returned from their overseas assignment in America.
Ashley, you know. Yes, what is it? This soup is a bit bland.
Rebecca said, as she sprinkled salt on it as usual.
Mom, salt again? It's not bland at all. No, it's true. Everything Ashley cooks is so bland, it doesn't feel satisfying. But, Mom, the doctor told you to cut back on salt because of your high blood pressure.
Jeffrey argued, but Rebecca, never one to listen, responded smugly.
I'd be happy to eat what I like and go to the next world. Ashley, you know.
It started again. Rebecca's nagging always began with this phrase. The best way to handle it was to just let it go in one ear and out the other. However, what worried me was Ryan, who would often imitate Rebecca, saying, Ashley, you know. At his age, he was eager to mimic everything, which often made me anxious. Another thing that troubled me was the triangular relationship that had formed between Rebecca, Melissa, and Ryan.
What a brat!
Rebecca would say loudly enough for Melissa to hear. Ignoring Rebecca, Melissa would try to leave the house as soon as she got back from school. Melissa, having seen Rebecca's true nature from a young age, refused to open up to her. Melissa, I'm coming too, Ryan would say, trying to follow Melissa.
Ryan, don't you want to eat some snacks with Grandma? I bought all your favorite treats.
Then she would call out, unable to resist the lure of snacks.
Really? Then I'll have some snacks.
Ryan would smile and say,
Ryan, it's almost dinner time, so just a little bit, okay?
Got it. He is smart, so he knows that without being told, right? Yeah. Seeing this every day, the only person I could vent to was Jeffrey. No matter how busy he was with work, he always took the time to listen to my troubles. Thanks to my kind-hearted Jeffrey, by the next morning, I was able to stand in front of the mirror with my usual smile, having forgotten my worries. However, about a year after we started living with Rebecca, an unexpected tragedy struck. One day, I received a call from Jeffrey's company saying he had collapsed at work. I rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. When I brought Jeffrey home from the hospital, Melissa just cried silently, and Ryan kept shaking Jeffrey's body, saying, Dad, wake up. Why are you sleeping? How was I supposed to raise these kids alone from now on? The grief and anxiety from losing Jeffrey hit me all at once. I told myself that I had to protect them, to stay strong. I vowed never to cry in front of them. But then, Rebecca uttered heartless words to me.
You lost your husband, yet you don't shed a single tear.
You really are heartless.
I'd like to see the faces of your parents.
Regardless of how much she disliked me, those were not words to say in front of the children. When Nicholas passed away a year ago, Rebecca had said,
The funeral will be taken care of by Jeffrey and Joshua, so I don't need to do anything.
It's a relief. She lay on the couch, laughing at a comedy show.
I laughed so hard I cried,
she said. For Nicholas's memorial service, she had merely suggested, "We can do it on a small scale at home," leaving the rest to others. But when it came to Jeffrey, her attitude was entirely different.
"Jeffrey's memorial service will be at the community center,"
she declared, and even made the reservation. On the day of the memorial, everything went smoothly, thanks to the staff at the venue. Just as the post-service meal was about to begin, Rebecca said, "Ashley, the kids and I will take our food home. You handle the rest," holding a paper bag filled with food. She added, "The cab is waiting with the kids," and left for home. I returned home 2 hours later.
Huh?
I noticed familiar cardboard boxes piled up. These were the boxes Rebecca had asked me to buy a few days earlier. They were placed in a corner of the garage, where Rebecca usually disposed of trash. When I opened the boxes, I found familiar clothes and shoes, all my belongings. "These are things we don't need anymore, so take everything if you want," Rebecca had said.
What?
As I turned around, she was standing over me, looking down. Rebecca then told me, "Now that Jeffrey is gone, you're just a stranger to us. So, please leave." She pointed outside the gate as she spoke. "Understood," I replied immediately. She seemed momentarily surprised by my quick response, but then smiled.
"I'm glad you're so understanding,"
she said.
"Where are Ryan and Melissa?"
I asked. "They're at a relative's house. I'll arrange for them to be brought home later. So, just pack your things and leave quickly," Rebecca urged. As I loaded my belongings into the car. "But you're lucky. Even if you're kicked out of here, you still have the house Jeffrey left you," I overheard her say. Ignoring her words, I said,
"Goodbye, Rebecca. Thank you for everything,"
and left the in-laws' house. Upon returning home, I immediately started cleaning the entire house. Before I knew it, it was pitch dark outside, and the clock showed it was past 8 p.m. "Hello, Rebecca? It's Ashley." "Oh, Ashley? What do you want?" Rebecca's voice was clearly groggy from sleep.
"Ryan and Melissa haven't come home yet."
"Oh, Melissa and Ryan? They're already asleep." "Asleep? Ryan said he wanted to sleep with me, so there's nothing I could do."
"Nothing you could do."
"Anyway, I'm exhausted from today. And tomorrow, we're leaving early for a trip to amusement park. I'll contact you later."
"Hello?"
She hung up the phone abruptly. I knew it. I was certain Rebecca never intended to send the kids back. And having been told something by Melissa, I had pretended to be deceived. This occurred a few days after Jeffrey's passing.
"Hey, Ryan, how about living with Grandma from now on?"
"Yeah, with Mom and Melissa too."
"No, I mean just you and Grandma. If you do, I'll buy you lots of sweets and grant all your wishes."
"Really? You'll buy me lots of sweets?"
"Yes, lots."
"Will you take me to the amusement park?" "Of course. As many times as you want, tens or even hundreds of times."
"Yay!
"Then I'll stay with Grandma. But you must keep this a secret from Mom and Melissa, okay? Just between you and Grandma." "Okay, a secret." Melissa had told me about this conversation between Ryan and Rebecca. Ryan had confided in Melissa, saying, "Melissa, this is a secret." I was genuinely worried about what would happen if Ryan decided he wanted to live with Rebecca. However, Melissa reassured me.
"Mom, leave Ryan to me. I have a special trick."
I decided to trust Melissa's words. It was 5 days later when Rebecca contacted me to come and pick up the children. When I arrived at the in-laws' house, Melissa was already waiting with their bags at the front door. As I finished loading the luggage into the car, Melissa and I entered the house.
Mom!
Ryan came running from the back of the house, holding a souvenir bag. Here, this is a souvenir.
A souvenir? Oh, what a lovely pendant. Thank you, Ryan.
Just as I was feeling relieved to see Ryan looking well. Oh, Ashley, you're early.
Did you finish loading the luggage?
Rebecca spoke up.
Yes, I did. Then, Ryan, say goodbye to Mom and Melissa.
What? At the very least, she could have invited us in for coffee. I was taken aback as Ryan quickly put on his shoes, turned around, and said,
See you later, Grandma. Bye.
Ryan, hurry to the car.
Okay.
Rebecca stood frozen with her mouth agape as Ryan cheerfully waved and left the house with Melissa. Trying to suppress my laughter, I said, Well, I'll be going now. And headed towards the door.
Wait a minute, Ashley.
Rebecca called after me. Yes, what is it?
That.
That? I pretended to think for a moment and then said,
Oh, you mean the plan to make Ryan the adopted child of Joshua and Stephanie? How did you find out about that? No way.
Yes, that's right.
Joshua called me from abroad. No. When? How? The day after the memorial service. I thought it was a call to apologize for not attending the service, but I was shocked to hear that story. What's so surprising about that? I thought it was inconvenient for Joshua and Stephanie not to have children. What's wrong with that?
Her unapologetic attitude left me more exasperated than angry. But, Rebecca, I said with a sly smile.
What?
Rebecca's face tightened. Too bad. The Ryan you tried to bribe with gifts managed to slip away.
What?
Rebecca looked down, clearly agitated.
Let me make this clear once and for all. No matter what happens, I will never give up my children. Take care.
With that, I hurried to the car where the children were waiting. On the drive home, listening to Ryan in the back seat talk about his memories of Disneyland.
Hey, Mom.
He suddenly spoke in a serious tone.
What is it? I'm going to be a hero. What?
Ryan's words surprised me so much that I almost turned around despite being in the middle of driving.
A wizard in a light blue dress with a pink ribbon cast a spell on me. Right, Melissa? Yes, she used her magic wand and said bibbidi bobbidi boo, turning you into a brave hero. Yeah. I'll become a hero and protect you, Mom.
The one who cast the spell on Ryan was the fairy godmother. The magical fairy who turned a pumpkin into a carriage. Melissa had translated the magical words for Ryan.
If Ryan's protecting me, then I have nothing to fear. Thank you.
Even though I had vowed never to cry in front of my children. Tears welled up uncontrollably. Melissa, sitting in the passenger seat, quietly handed me a hand towel. I promised myself again that I would protect my children. Several months passed. One day, as I was enjoying peaceful days with my family of 3, I received a phone call. Hello, Ashley? The voice on the other end was tearful, accompanied by sniffles. Hello. How have you been? The caller was Rebecca. Even though Jeffrey is gone, you're still part of the family, so it's okay to call you, right? Am I still family? I thought I became a stranger.
That's...
So, what brings you here?
That was then. Anyway, I actually fell at home and twisted my ankle.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yes, it's terrible. I can't even drive to go shopping.
Drive? Oh, you mean the pink bicycle? In that case, you should ask Stephanie for help, shouldn't you?
Yes, that's right. But I can't ask Stephanie since she's abroad, right?
That's true. So, how much will you pay me?
What? How much?
I mean, how much will you pay me to work as your housekeeper?
Why should I pay family?
I'm not sure what you're misunderstanding, but I'm not so kind-hearted to work for free for someone else's household.
But...
What? Legally, we're already strangers. That's the fact.
Legally? How can you be so heartless?
You seem unaware. When you divorce or lose a spouse, you're legally considered strangers. There's no obligation to report anything.
What?
I don't understand why you're angry. You should be thanking me instead.
You.
Well, I have a customer waiting, so I'll end the call here. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number.
Ashley, you did it.
The guest is Stephanie. She's currently back in the country alone for a short visit.
Maybe I went a bit too far?
Not at all. It was quite satisfying. By now, I'm sure Rebecca is on the phone with Joshua, utterly devastated.
Yes, although I do wish I could see her face up close.
Absolutely. It was Joshua who advised me that legally, Rebecca is just another person to me. I can only imagine how Rebecca must feel having that truth hurled at her by her own son. Stephanie is here today to discuss the new house she and Joshua are planning to build once they return. After I was kicked out of my in-laws' house, I left my job at the architectural firm I had been working at and started planning to open my own design office. When I told Joshua and Stephanie about it, they said they wanted me to design their house.
It feels so strange. We became close only after Jeffrey passed away.
Until then, I had only exchanged greetings with Joshua and Stephanie a few times a year at my in-laws' house, without any meaningful conversation. Our relationship grew closer, ironically, after Jeffrey's death. It was because of the adoption plan Rebecca had concocted. I also learned at that time that Stephanie had a uterine condition and had to give up on having children. Yet, Joshua and Stephanie accepted this reality and decided to enjoy their life together as a couple. Some ties are cut, while others are formed. I believe it's Jeffrey who brought us together even after his passing.
Mom, I'm home. It's Stephanie.
Melissa, Ryan, long time no see. How have you been?
We're good. By the way, Ashley, I've been meaning to ask, where did you get that cute pendant?
Isn't it adorable? It's a magical pendant Jeffrey got for me as a souvenir. But I was the one who picked it out.
A magical pendant? I'm so jealous.
Well then, why don't we all go to there together next time?
Thank you. That sounds wonderful. Let's do that.
The children chatted happily with Stephanie. Watching the three of them, I couldn't help but smile. Around my neck, the glass slipper pendant sparkled. The doorbell rang. Eddie, my husband, was home. Usually, I would go to the door to greet him, but today I didn't have the energy to rush down. The doorbell rang again, louder and more impatient this time, than the sound of the door unlocking and opening.
Hey! At least come and greet me properly.
I could hear his voice shouting from downstairs. Summoning all the strength I could, I replied,
I'm sorry. I've been taking care of Mila, and I'm not feeling well either.
Our daughter Mila had come home from school early with a high fever. Taking care of her, I too had started to feel feverish and dizzy. Eddie didn't respond, whether he heard me or not. I could just hear his heavy footsteps, indicating his displeasure.
Hey! Dinner isn't ready.
I couldn't help but be exasperated by Eddie's predictable behavior and heartless words.
Hey! I've got an important meeting tomorrow. I can't afford to get sick from her.
Eddie glared at me with a puzzled look, waving me away. Then, out of nowhere, he took my sheets to the storage room. He even went upstairs and ripped off Mila's sheets while she was sleeping. Mila shrank back, confused by the sudden commotion.
Sick people need to be isolated. Go to the storage room. No way.
Mila and I were pushed into the cramped storage room with no windows. My name is Noelle. I live in a suburban house, spending my days doing household chores. Eddie leaves for work by 7 a.m., having worked at an insurance company for nearly 30 years since graduating college. Eddie always gets dressed in his suit by 6 a.m., appears in the living room, sits at the table, and picks up the newspaper I laid out for him. Then he silently sips the coffee I hand him and eats the toast with a generous amount of margarine. Our routine hasn't changed since we got married, even after having children, even on days off. His dedication to his job has earned him recognition, and he now holds a managerial position. I found out about his promotion much later, as he didn't even bother to share the news. Looking back, Eddie remained unchanged in our marriage, while I evolved. Since childhood, I loved reading, always immersing myself in books whenever I had free time. I would sometimes go out to play with friends, but even then, I'd be thinking about the book I was reading. Naturally, the more outgoing kids formed other groups, and fewer people gathered around me. At the time, it didn't hurt me. I was actually happy to have more time to myself. Spending time in the library, surrounded by books I loved, shaped half of my life. People might have seen me as a bit of a loner. But sometimes, I could be unexpectedly proactive. I hated wasting time the most. Reading and diving into the world of books required a quiet environment and plenty of time. Pointless discussions that never reached a conclusion. Committees where no one volunteered and only silence remained. All these things just ate into my day. So, if I thought stepping up would wrap things up quickly, I'd immediately raise my hand and give my opinion. It's funny to think about it now, but this assertiveness once got me elected as the leader for a sports day event. At that time, I thought finishing the event quickly would ensure I had time to read, so I had a long-term plan in mind. Eddie and I met at a university club. That's where I met Eddie. Eddie always prioritized efficiency and acted accordingly, even as a student. It wasn't fate or a passionate love confession that brought us together. Other members of the club often enjoyed their university life adventures, so the clubroom was usually empty. Most of the time, it was just him and me in the clubroom. Even in the same space, there was no pressure, and we naturally started talking about literature. This is what it means to have good chemistry, I guess. Thinking back, maybe I was enjoying my own adventure too. After Eddie graduated and started working, it was the first time I felt the clubroom was lonely. Oh, this is what love feels like. Apparently, he felt the same sense of loss, and a few years later, he proposed to me. That is the reason for our current situation. Eddie's income was sufficient, so our family never faced financial difficulties. Therefore, I didn't have to work and could focus on household chores. Actually, I had considered going out to work several times, but Eddie refused. According to him, it was the ultimate humiliation for people to think that a husband's income was so low that his wife had to work. Another routine in our household is waking up our only daughter, Mila, who is in 8th grade. She has never gotten up with just one call, and I have to call her at least 3 times. Though she has become more responsible since starting middle school, today it took 5 calls before she stumbled down the stairs. Conversations start in our house only after Mila wakes up. She talks about her friends, complaints about her homeroom teacher, and the latest popular artists. Eddie never responds, so she talks to me. While making sandwiches for the two of them, I listen half-heartedly, but I enjoy discussing the plot of the drama we watch together. In a household with little conversation, Mila is the one who brightens things up like a flower. Though I don't say it out loud, I am grateful that Mila's presence balances our family. Unlike us two bookworms, Mila has loved physical activities since she was little. Mila, who is extremely competitive, cried loudly when she didn't come in first at the elementary school sports day, delaying the next program. Although she has become more manageable with age, she has always been a child who constantly moves around, running around the playground during breaks. In the upper grades of elementary school, she became interested in tennis and wanted to join a tennis class. After entering middle school, she quit the tennis class but continued playing tennis in her school club activities. Besides physical activities, she can't stand having no plans on her days off and always finds reasons to go out. The topics of her conversations about friends change so frequently that it's hard to keep track. She easily makes friends with anyone, whether it's a child who often comes over, a club activity friend, or a classmate sitting next to her. When it comes to club activities, I have to know not only Mila's friends but also their parents to express my thanks properly. When Mila first entered middle school, I desperately made a notebook to keep track of her friends' relationships. I was worried that the pandemic might change Mila's social interactions. Club activities lost their competitions and games, and group outings were restricted. I thought she might feel lonely, but with modern SNS, not much has changed. I really want to take the family on trips, but the current infection control measures make it difficult. I feel guilty as a parent, but Mila doesn't seem to mind and shows no concern. Though Mila arrives at the table with a messy bedhead in the morning, she starts chatting non-stop once she sits down. The toast in her hand hardly gets any smaller.
Keep an eye on the time.
Okay. After spending some time zoning out, Mila slowly starts moving like in slow motion. This is the usual morning routine in our household. Eddie finishes his breakfast, folds the newspaper, and places it on the table. He stands up, heads to the sink to shave and brush his teeth. The chair Eddie stood from is always turned towards the hallway at the same angle. So meticulous, I think. However, he never clears his coffee cup or plate. In the early days of our marriage, I tried to address this, but Eddie always responded,
"That's a housewife's job."
After 23 years of marriage, I once consulted with my mother-in-law. Was he always this laid back? Carefully, I asked her about his henpecked husband nature. Seeing through my intention, she smiled wryly and sighed.
"My husband was the epitome of a henpecked husband. Eddie wasn't particularly attached to him, but it's amazing how much he takes after him. My husband was the epitome of a henpecked husband. Eddie wasn't particularly attached to him, but it's amazing how much he takes after him."
His attitude has remained unchanged even after Mila was born. As far as I remember, Eddie has never taken Mila out for fun. Although we've been on a few family trips, Eddie always looks expressionless in the photos. Neither Eddie nor I have any notable hobbies. Originally similar, our interest in books waned as we couldn't find quiet reading time. My attachment to unread books gradually faded, and I even got rid of some of the books I had accumulated since my student days.
"Hey, about these books on the shelf, should we get rid of them? They're quite damaged, and some covers have faded so much you can't tell what they are.
We probably won't read them again in the future."
"Shut up! Work is more important than reading. You should understand by now that you can't always spend time on things you like. Get rid of them if you want."
As the years go by, various passions cool. Some things change, some things don't, but it's strange that only the unpleasant things seem to stay the same for a long time.
"Hey, lunch is late. Do you know what time it is?"
Oh, I'm sorry. I hurriedly prepared and handed Eddie a sandwich.
Geez, he gets irritated if he's even a minute late leaving the house.
Eddie hurried out the door. At some point, we stopped saying I'm off and have a good day. But now, that feels normal. I no longer got worked up over it. Sometimes I would remember how Eddie used to laugh a lot in the beginning, but love and romance are different things. I wasn't looking for a romantic game anymore. I didn't need him to hold me tenderly. Is this what they call the state of resignation? As I pondered this, I called out to Mila once more. As Eddie, who kept precise time, left for work, Mila finally started to worry about the time.
What? It's already this late?
She finally began stuffing the half-eaten toast into her mouth. This was our routine every day until one afternoon. After a simple lunch, I was doing the dishes when I heard the door open.
Oh, Mila. Was today a day for early dismissal from school?
As I thought this, I headed to the entrance. There was Mila, sitting on the floor.
What's wrong, Mila? You're early. Your face is red.
I reached out to touch her neck. Her skin felt unusually hot. Hotter than just being warmed by the outside temperature. You have a high fever. It must have been tough. Usually, this would be the time she starts talking about all sorts of things that happened at school, but she could only manage.
I was fine in the morning, but around second period, I started feeling bad and went to the nurse's office. I thought I could make it home, but I got nauseous on the bus. I was fine in the morning, but around second period, I started feeling bad and went to the nurse's office. I thought I could make it home, but I got nauseous on the bus.
I quickly cleared her bed, and she collapsed onto it. Do you want something to drink?
Yeah, just let me sleep for now.
She croaked. With the flu going around, I was worried and managed to get her changed. As soon as the evening clinic opened, I called and made an appointment. Perhaps because she had slept a bit, she was more mobile than when she first got home. Still, I had to support her as we hurried to the clinic. The waiting room was packed, but because of Mila's high fever, we waited in an isolated area. Waiting with Mila resting her head on my shoulder, struggling to breathe, felt like an eternity, though it was actually only about 30 minutes. I wanted to let her lie down, but there was no space in the cramped waiting area. Finally, we were called into the examination room. Seeing that neither the doctor nor the nurse wore protective gear, I felt a little relieved. The diagnosis was a common cold, and no isolation was needed. I was relieved, but Mila was still unwell. After taking Mila home and sending her to her room, I rushed to the drugstore. I grabbed sports drinks for hydration, cooling pads, and debated whether she could eat jelly and soup before tossing them into the cart. I hurried back home and checked on her, who was resting peacefully. Feeling reassured, I went down to the living room, sank into the sofa, and took a deep breath. Maybe from all the running around, I felt more exhausted than usual. The sofa felt incredibly comfortable. Every muscle in my body seemed to relax completely, and a deep sigh escaped my lips. There was still time before Eddie got home. I still had time to prepare dinner. Just a little rest, I thought, as I lay down on the sofa. At some point, I dozed off, and when I opened my eyes again, the clock showed it was already evening.
Oh my!
I tried to get up, but my whole body felt heavy and my head pounded with each heartbeat. I quickly remembered the day's schedule. I might have caught her cold. Tentatively, I took my temperature. The thermometer read over 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Dazed, I pondered what to do next. I didn't have the strength or time to go back to the clinic. The biggest challenge was Eddie. He believed it was my duty to handle the household chores. If he came home to find nothing prepared, he would surely explode in anger. Just thinking about standing up and walking to the kitchen felt overwhelming. I quickly composed a text to Eddie, explaining that I wasn't feeling well. I told him that I couldn't prepare dinner and asked if he could buy something for dinner. My head was pounding, but I tried to write in a way that wouldn't upset Eddie. I sent the text and waited anxiously for his response, but there was none. After a while, the message was marked as read, but no reply came. I realized how much I was being swayed by Eddie's reactions.
That's right, I need to focus on getting something for Mila to eat.
Despite feeling dizzy, I made my way to the kitchen. Through the pain and nausea, I managed to make some soup for Mila and placed it by her bedside. Mila was sleeping soundly, but her face was still red. Small beads of sweat dotted her forehead. I gently wiped her sweat with a towel. Her warmth still radiated through the damp cloth. She still had a high fever. Soon after, the doorbell rang. Eddie was home. Usually, I would go to the door to greet him, but today I didn't have the energy to rush down. After a few more impatient rings of the doorbell, the door unlocked and opened.
Hey, at least come and greet me properly.
I could hear Eddie's voice shouting from the entrance. Summoning all my strength, I replied.
I'm sorry, I've been taking care of Mila, and I'm not feeling well myself.
He didn't respond. But I could hear his heavy, irritated footsteps, so he must have heard. Immediately, his angry voice echoed.
Hey! Dinner isn't ready!
I couldn't help but be exasperated by Eddie's predictable behavior and heartless words. I slowly made my way down the stairs and finally reached the living room.
Welcome back. I sent you a text earlier, did you see it? Mila has a high fever, and I think I've caught it too. You managed to make dinner for Mila, so you can make mine too.
Eddie shouted, cutting off my words.
I barely managed to make Mila's dinner. You're an adult, you should be able to understand the text, I retorted.
Eddie seemed slightly taken aback, but quickly remembered something.
Hey, I have an important meeting tomorrow. I can't afford to get sick.
He glared at me with a harsh look and gestured for me to move away.
Sick people should be isolated. Go to the storage room.
Without thinking, he grabbed my sheets and took them to the storage room. He even went upstairs and ripped the sheets off Mila's bed while she was sleeping. Startled, Mila curled up, not understanding what was happening.
What are you doing? Mila has a fever.
Backing away as if I were a monster, Eddie snarled.
I don't care. My promotion depends on this meeting.
He threw Mila's sheets into the storage room.
There's no point in talking to him anymore,
I thought, utterly exhausted. I wrapped Mila's remaining blanket around her shivering shoulders. Without looking at me as I silently prepared water and medicine, Eddie put on a mask and yelled.
Get in there quickly!
Eddie pushed us halfway into the storage room and started disinfecting the common areas with alcohol. This felt like we were being treated like monsters.
Use the upstairs bathroom. Don't come down to the first floor,
he ordered, his words piercing through the door along with the sound of the alcohol spray. He seemed to have plenty of time to disinfect, despite his important meeting tomorrow. Mila and I ended up spending the night in the storage room. It started to rain outside. I could hear the gentle sound of rain, the irregular drips falling from the eaves. Although we were sheltered from the rain and wind inside the house, the storage room had no air conditioning and only a small skylight. The room, filled with seasonal appliances and clothes we rarely used, only had enough space for one person to lie down. Even though it was early summer, the heat lingered after sunset. The poor ventilation made it impossible to rest with the humidity from the rain and our fevers. Whether it was the heat or our fevers, the room felt stuffy. The skylight couldn't be opened. Mila's fever seemed to have subsided, but I could hear her faint sobs, likely from Eddie's harsh treatment. She tried to muffle her cries so I wouldn't worry, but her effort only tightened the knot in my heart. I couldn't tell if my fever or my thoughts were causing my head to steam. Since Mila was born, my priorities had shifted from reading to her. Whenever Mila suddenly wanted to go out or asked me to practice tennis with her, I could easily close my book. I didn't mind sending her to tennis lessons. Making her happy became my greatest joy. Mila, who is the most important thing in my life. The time spent thinking, worrying, and enjoying life with Mila. Her sleeping face, even as a middle schooler, was still adorable. My precious daughter. Thinking about it, there have been countless times I've been exasperated with Eddie, but this was unprecedented. My rising anger had apparently reached its limit. I started to plan my actions for the coming days. My long-dormant assertiveness began to reignite. How much time had passed? I must have fallen asleep. Morning came, and the rain had stopped. I touched her neck and felt the coolness. Her fever had finally broken, and I felt a sense of relief. At the same time, I felt lightened. I slowly stood up to put my plan into action.
He must have gone to work on time. Just wait and see.
Mom, I'm feeling much better than yesterday, but my whole body aches from sleeping on the floor.
You're still a bit unsteady. Don't push yourself.
Mila and I took turns showering and warmed up in the living room.
What was with Dad's behavior? I don't even want to call him Dad anymore. This time, it was awful. I've had many grievances, but this was too much. Mom, you've put up with too much. This is grounds for a divorce.
Mila, if that happens, would you come with me?
Of course. If it means staying with him, I'd rather live on my own.
Holding back tears of relief and joy, I shared my plan with Mila, who nodded firmly. We devised a detailed plan and executed it diligently. First, we exaggerated our coughing and sneezing in the living room and bedroom. We replaced the alcohol in the spray bottles with tap water. We swapped the disinfectant wipes with regular wet wipes. We kept only the necessary painkillers and cold medicine and disposed of the rest. Mila's prescription from the clinic had been used up by the time she recovered. I picked up my smartphone for a particular search. When Eddie came home that night, he made no comments or showed any concern for us, focusing on preparing dinner. More than the disappointment of not hearing a caring word from him, I felt a determination similar to just wait and see. A month passed. The plan was a bit delayed, but the results came steadily. Eddie came home earlier than usual, looking unsteady.
Oh, what's wrong?
Are you feeling sick? I feigned concern with thinly veiled words.
I think I have a fever. I'm worried about work, but I left today's tasks to my subordinates.
From his tone, it seemed he intended to go to work tomorrow. Work is important, right?
Why not? Now is a crucial time.
Suppressing a smirk, I finally said the words I had been waiting to say.
Mila and I should avoid getting sick. For the sake of your important work, we'll stay separate.
I said this and gave Mila, who had just come home, the okay sign. Mila and I quickly gathered our pre-packed bags and moved out.
Hey, who's going to take care of me?
He called out in a hoarse voice.
Sorry, but we have to stay isolated. There's a note on the desk, I replied, leaving the divorce papers as we walked out.
I heard his angry shouts from behind, but I felt no regret. Instead, I was filled with a sense of liberation, as if freed from long-standing worries. The sunlight seemed brighter than usual. Mila seemed to feel the same, humming a tune. Her steps were almost like skipping. We moved into the house we had found earlier. We had been gradually moving things over, and he hadn't noticed. The new house, though smaller, was big enough for the two of us.
It's smaller than the old house. I'm sorry.
I apologized, and Mila responded cheerfully.
It's fine. It's much bigger than the storage room.
Mila replied with a hint of irony, and we both burst into laughter. For her, the biggest benefit was that there was a shopping district between her school and home, so she could hang out with friends and still get home on time. Her surprising efficiency must be the only positive trait she inherited from Eddie. After that, Eddie's calls came non-stop, draining my phone's battery. Texts were endless too. I quickly went to the phone company and changed my number and phone. Regarding the divorce, I contacted the court and found no records had been submitted, so I sent a certified letter through my lawyer. The lawyer facilitated the proceedings for an amicable divorce. Given that our lifestyle had relied heavily on Eddie's income, I expected a tough custody battle. However, Eddie didn't contest custody, so I easily obtained it. In truth, I had been saving money secretly since I started feeling resigned about my life with Eddie. Eddie, who never cared about household finances, was unaware of this. I had enough savings, but to cover Mila's tuition and future expenses, I started working part-time. I found a job at a small bookstore that also dealt in second-hand books. I liked the owner's personality and their respect for books, so I applied and got the job. Having lived as a housewife, I was nervous about handling a job, but my efficiency was recognized, and I got along well with my colleagues. Indeed, I could be proud of my efficiency over the past month since deciding to divorce. Mila seemed even brighter than before. Perhaps Eddie had chained us both down invisibly. Looking out the window of my part-time job, I saw Eddie walking tiredly in a wrinkled suit. I doubted he even knew how to use an iron or where it was. I had no interest in a passing stranger and turned back to my work immediately. Recently, I found more time to read at home again. Partly because I had more time, but mainly because Mila was becoming more independent.
Good morning.
Mila greeted me as I woke up, preparing toast for breakfast. She was indeed changing. I felt joy in this change as I bit into my toast,